Hello, my name is Brian Lambert, and I am the President and Chief Performance Officer at Growth Matters. And I'm going to talk to you today about overcoming complexity and staying productive in times of change. So my first question for you is, how is it going at work? How are you doing? Well, many of the times I ask that question, I hear the standard answer heard around the world, and that is, oh, I'm very busy. Oh, I'm so busy, Brian. Whew, it's super busy. Busy. And, I used to say that too. But then I thought there's a difference between being busy and being productive. What would it mean to you to say, oh man, I was super productive today? How would that look and how would that make you feel? There's a difference between being busy and being productive. As one of the thought leaders in the sales enablement space and the co-host of the Inside Sales Enablement podcast, I've talked to literally hundreds of people since July of last year. Many of those people I've talked to since the beginning of the coronavirus pandemic. These folks are all dealing with challenges at work, pressures, and individual aspirations, all of these things colliding. At the same time, I'm talking to leaders who are having to make tough choices about their company, their positioning in the market, and even their products and services. When you look at what's happening, all companies have gone through the first wave by this time. It's here in the middle of May 2020, and companies have taken these top 7 actions across the board. They've frozen pretty much hiring plans, canceled all non-critical travel and training, perhaps furloughed their contingent workforce, frozen their marketing budgets as they can. They've stopped non-critical consulting engagements. They've renegotiated with vendors to extend payables and suppliers, and they've postponed major investments. That's not to say that some spending isn't happening. In fact, there are many industries that are having to really invest right now. Industries in transportation, warehouse, shipping, even in the grocery business are all expanding right now. And you can just think about what the top critical purchases are in the economy and follow the money to understand which companies are growing right now and which companies and industries are shrinking. When you look at the leadership response, this is a visual from Deloitte. Came out in early May. From a COVID-19 perspective, it impacts what they consider to be and what they call business continuity. This is the ability of an organization or a company to continue to operate. When you look at the challenges of COVID-19, depending on the industry that businesses are in, they're seeing a hit to overall business operations such as sales and production. Many companies are having liquidity challenges, as you can hear from Airbnb and other organizations that are laying people off. There's also the risk of security breaches. Companies are under attack from cybersecurity because everybody's working from home, and companies need to look at their cash flow, their balance sheets, and determine how they can come up with, in many cases, 12 months of cash to continue to operate. So a lot of the decisions that are being made now are with the understanding that the COVID-19 turnaround could take months to come out of, if not years. When you look at the different solutions to handle these, companies also have a standard playbook, and it's really around staying above this insolvency line. While these decisions are made often in the boardroom, you can see their impacts at the worker level. And it's helpful for all people, all employees, to understand what's going on here. This should not be a mystery to anybody. This is public information. It's also available, and it's a playbook that ran in 2008 in the Great Recession. It's the same thing. So these are universal truths about what do you do as a business leader and an executive in times of crisis. And the goal is to stay above the line. Well, how does that impact individual workers? I like this view because it doesn't have hard numbers on it. And what I wanted to point out here is the percentage and the impact of the scenarios here. High income countries are going to be hard hit. Why is that? Well, I'm making some assumptions that these have to do with economies that are largely service driven. In other words, hospitality driven, services driven, less manufacturing driven. These services are difficult to continue to operate when people are not consuming or buying. And since an economy is driven by transactions, larger economies are going to take a bigger hit because less transactions and discretionary spend. However, this also applies to industrialized countries that rely on technology, integration of technologies, and the evolution of their workforce to achieve new skills. What we could be seeing is a displacement in larger high-income countries that really looks at a shift in how workers evolve and also the value contribution that workers make. In other words, the skills gap that continued and that we saw after 2008 across low wage earners, mid-wage earners, and high-income earners continues to widen. There have been many jobs that I know of personally in the mid and high salary ranges that have been left unfilled because of the skills shortages in the United States. So what this does is it creates a bit of a pressure cooker, because right now, as companies go through and have continued their first wave, now it's time to look at the second wave. And this is where the harder decisions come down to. And these harder decisions have to do with the trade-off decisions and doing more with less. The doing more with less challenge is real. Right now we're in a huge do more with less challenge. It's the ultimate challenge, perhaps the greatest challenge that we've seen in our lifetimes. And companies and investors and even the U.S. government is having to make choices on where they invest. This is important to understand at a macro level because it affects us as individuals and how we work as well. So let's talk about what you might be going through. This webinar is really targeted at bringing together leaders and individuals in teams. So leaders and teams together to have a conversation. Right now, in the conversations that I'm having, I'm hearing that the personal effort of workers isn't enough to keep up with the volume of work that's happening. Goals are constantly shifting. You can call it agility, you can call it speed of business, but employees are getting to the point where they're having to work on major new initiatives all at one time. That was happening before, but when you have a large amount of people leaving an organization, that work doesn't stop. It's having to shift to workers. Project scopes are therefore changing constantly. Leaders are very reactive, and people are struggling to produce outputs. There's a lot of reasons for this, but the biggest reasons have to do with the turnover in the knowledge working force. A lot of people that have know-how and know what to do are leaving the company, and for a variety of different reasons, layoffs, etc. And then the second reason is when you go to all remote work, there's an assumption that many people make that remote work has to work the same way, and it doesn't. There's a completely different way of working that most people are not equipped for. When COVID-19 first hit, for example, Amazon could not keep webcams in. A lot of people don't have home office setups to handle 8 to 10 hours of working from home when their kids are at home, things like that. So the big thing here is what happens. And when you think about performance and productivity, a lot of people are having to do the work, but it's 80-20. Or sometimes it's 90-10, where 10% of the people do 90% of the work, or 20% of the people do 80% of the work. That's just the numbers. This number is continuing to be under attack because what does it mean to be a worker today? How does work get done? And who's making decisions? So while it's easy to blame management for these things, there's some systemic issues across the board in a time like this. And my message to everybody is we're all in the same boat. How do we work through this together? So let's talk about that here. The difference in moving forward versus what's happening is in the past, I'm just going to say we as business workers are largely result driven. Result driven means you understand what the project is, You understand what your work is in the project, and you get the project done. You cross it off the to-do list. That's the busy. We are busy when we achieve results. The challenge is that right now we're seeing a shift to outcome-driven or mission-driven work. In other words, we have strategic priorities to cope with COVID and in the work environment that we're in. We need to set strategic priorities and rally around one or two. That means that people need to contribute to those strategic priorities. Now, if leadership and management haven't set strategic priorities and reset those expectations, that's a whole other story, and that needs to happen because we're in a do more with less environment. If those 2 to 3 strategic initiatives have been clarified, redefined, and recommunicated, and leaders have asked people to double down on 2 to 3 things and prioritize, now we need to achieve those missions. And those goals and objectives and being mission driven is completely different than being results driven. Only 3 things happen naturally in a company. First is friction. That's the interpersonal dynamics that happen in a highly stressful environment. We need to recognize that friction happens, especially in time of crisis, but it also happens naturally. A lot of the dysfunction that we might be seeing right now in companies existed before. It's just being exacerbated by COVID. The second one is confusion. Where does confusion come from? It comes from a lack of clarity. That lack of clarity likely existed before. However, people found comfort in getting results done. Those results didn't necessarily align to an objective or a mission like it needs to now because leaders are going to prioritize. When the prioritization happens, it is a confusing spot for a lot of people who don't understand their contribution to the goal. So confusion happens and assumptions get made and people feel left out, etc. And if you are in a spot where you're not sure of what you're doing on a daily basis, what contribution you need to be making, that's a risky position to be in, and it creates a stress and people can lash out. The third is underperformance. That's naturally happens. This is why this is an important conversation. What does underperformance look like today, especially when we are in crisis response mode inside of companies? Underperformance means a higher level of performance today. The bar has gone up. So these things naturally devolve in a non-crisis environment, and they get accelerated in a crisis environment, especially when wisdom is leaving the company and people are having to work in a completely different way. And we need to recognize that. We have to recognize that in order to lead and sell and manage through this. This is why I would encourage you to replay this video with your team if you're in a leadership role. If you're reading this and watching this as an individual contributor, I would send it to your manager and ask for the management team to work with and view this video and talk about these things in a team environment in order to figure out collectively what needs to happen. And this is why I built this, and I've actually delivered this before, but I'm making it publicly available, is to have this conversation. So now let's talk about how do you move forward in this. That's the goal of this presentation, is how do we work through this? How do we make these decisions? How do we get productive? How do we move forward, make an impact, become mission driven, help our company succeed in this time, save our company in some of those cases where it might be heading down the wrong path as far as liquidity, and we need to turn that around. I mean, let's be honest. You could be talking about how do you save your company right now. So let's talk about these things. First, I'm going to back up. I am not going to give you a random list of stuff to go do. That's the worst thing I could do right now. Those people that are telling you to go off and go do a bunch of stuff are going to make the problem worse. I can get with you on the phone and explain why I'm so passionate about that. But right now, it's important to take a minute, take a step back, rethink about and re-engage around what's really happening. And this is an attempt here to do just that and give you some frameworks to think about this. So let's talk about what's happening. First of all, you've got 2 major forces at play right now post-COVID. You've got market forces at play in your industry, which I've just outlined. You also have a tension happening inside your organization, and especially if you're in a knowledge working environment. A knowledge working environment requires the brain power of humans to produce outputs and deliverables and add value to each other for the good of the company. If you're in a knowledge working environment, that usually means you're at a computer and you're producing something for somebody else. That production capability, that means you sitting at your computer, you're a producer. This is important, and you need to embrace that if you're in a knowledge working role. What are you producing for each other, and what are you producing that is of value to the company? Attending a meeting doesn't necessarily equate to production. And this is an important prioritization discussion that you can have. So let's talk about how you would think this through. When you plot this out from a production capability, there are individuals that produce and there are teams that produce. It's very likely that right now in your company, you guys are having to decide if individuals need to produce something or if teams are required to produce something and produce for example, if the sales team needs a new type of training, are you going to task an individual to go into their cube or to their home office and just get it done individual in a silo? Or are you going to have a team do that in the need for speed? Perhaps you're launching a free product offer. Because of COVID, you're going to go ahead and accelerate your product roadmap. You're going to launch new products. Is one person going to go do that on their own, or is that a team? Most of the time, you're going to be in a team environment right now. But what you're going to see is oftentimes we treat it like an individual is working on this, and that's part of the problem. The second piece of this is what time are you in and what's going on in your market. In many organizations and many markets, it was kind of a business as usual type of market condition. However, right now, digital transformation, customer experience, these types of initiatives were already happening, and companies were transforming very, very slowly in a lot of cases. What COVID has done is kind of ripped the Band-Aid off and accelerated transformation. That means the teaming requirement is a transformational teaming requirement of an individual teaming with another individual, or having to create rapid teams that are all doing project-based work. So when you plot this out, an individual working in a silo by themselves, working on information, that's command and control, a very little control and decision-making power by individual workers, and that's a siloed view. When you go across to the right and you're in a team production capability in an informational environment, that's going to be an optimized where you, as an organization, have figured out processes, made those processes repeatable. It's very much an optimized and smooth view, and everybody knows what's happening, what they need to be doing, roles are clear, and it just hums along. Now, if you're shifting and you go above this line into a transformational space, things are completely different in a transformational world. Individuals need to be integrated. Now, this is interesting because integrated into what? A lot of people as knowledge workers believe that everybody should integrate into their point of view. However, this integration that I'm talking about has to do with integrating into what's required in the market. That's completely different. So again, we can talk about this stuff later if you'd like, but this shift that happens, moving to a market-driven transformational view, it really requires knowledge workers to think about their value contribution differently. And then finally, in the top right, when you have a team environment in a transformational setting, you've got to be orchestrated. And that type of teaming is what you see a lot of on LinkedIn, where there's an assumption that people can get in a room, have diverse thoughts, and just magically produce things. However, given this 2x2 grid, there's a lot of moving parts to turning teams loose to be transformational. Also, when you go into a remote setting like this, it's really actually quite difficult to do the work. The reason for that is that the type of work that happens on the left two columns, A and C quadrants, that's an alignment type of effort where people try to align to each other. Oftentimes that's a persuasive, let's get everybody to a consensus and get to one point of view. On the right side, it's collaborative, multiple perspectives, and also those multiple perspectives need to come together, and you actually can end up with 3 or 4 different ways to tackle something. So it's less about alignment and more about collaborating. There are different leadership styles on the bottom left. You'll see if you're working in the bottom left, just to be honest with you, this from a strategy perspective, people are looking at artificial intelligence and machine learning down there to automate that work. As a knowledge worker, your value isn't valuable there as much as in the other quadrants. You as a person are valuable, and your humanness is valuable. I'm not judging or saying that you as a human are not valuable. I'm talking about the work, because this is about the work. So that work will get automated more and more in the bottom left. On the bottom right, the work of optimization, that's going to be about rationalizing that bottom right around centers of excellence and also expertise. Top left is more accommodative. This is based on customers and the market conditions where people want more configured solutions. That accommodative work requires individuals to give and take, and also for processes to exist to be able to configure. On the top right, it's a lot more coordination required. That coordination, it does involve a lot of communication. All of this involves communication, but when you're in the top right, it's a lot more communication and a lot more two-way learning, less broadcasting and more two-way learning to make sure people understand. So this is where work comes from. This is important because work is required for you to get a paycheck. That's where your value is as a knowledge worker. And in a leadership role, that's what you need from your people, is this type of work. Now, the challenge is, as I've been talking about, is how do you keep the work happening? And since we're hitting the second wave of COVID response, companies are going to be under pressure to do the work. So let's frame this out. What do we mean by work? I would like you to think about work as a production capability. In other words, people produce, companies produce, and that production, that ability to produce, is what's valuable to a company, especially in a services space, and even more especially in a manufacturing space. So obviously companies are what I'm talking about here, and companies are organized around how they create value, deliver value, and communicate value. There's a colleague of mine named Scott Santucci, who's one of the thought leaders in the space of sales enablement. He pretty much founded the sales enablement profession. He views companies as a value engine. The second unit of work or production capability is a function. That production that happens there through funding and resourcing and leadership is capabilities of solutions and products. And that capability excellence is often differentiated. Also, there's teams. Teams need to produce outcomes and through collaboration. And then there's individuals. Now, if I were to ask you, and if you're listening to this with your team, how would you guys define your team? If I were to ask, what's your team? What team are you on? I get two responses, and these are binary. You either answer this as your department and function. I'm on the marketing team. I'm on the finance team. I'm on the sales team. That is a definition that's been around forever. I would challenge you that that's not the definition of team that you would want to have in this type of work. The team that I'm talking about is around the missions and strategic initiatives of the company. You want to be on those teams. You want to be directly tied to the work as determined and prioritized by senior leadership. They don't necessarily, in their executive decision making, say, let's do these strategies. By the way, that's 100% marketing. Or by the way, that's 100% finance, and that's 100% sales. It just doesn't work that way anymore. These strategic initiatives that are being defined, such as let's make sure we can make sure the company is solvent, doesn't fit within a departmental view. That is a org chart view. And if you define your org chart as your team, that's going to be limiting, and your value contribution will be hidden. So what I would suggest is being clear on the team that you're on based on the outcomes that your team needs to produce against the strategies of the company. This is what you need to work on. If your team equals in your head, if I said, what team are you on? And you said finance, that's a department and a functional view. That's not going to be as valuable to your leadership team. Now, I'm not saying these functions are not valuable. I'm saying it's limiting and your value will be hidden. Also, the value that's required today to be successful to drive outcomes is cross-functional. Those that lead with their department by nature and by definition are not acting cross-functionally. Those that lead with their strategic teams that they're on and can define the 3 to 4 teams that they're on, and then, oh, by the way, I'm assigned to HR. Those are the types of teams and those are the types of people that are the most valuable to their companies. Now, I know I'm being very specific about this, and I understand that most leaders do not talk this way, but if you stop and think about what's really happening, this is what's really happening, and we might as well make the language more clear so people don't operate in two domains. You're in one or the other. You're aligned to your functional department, or you're aligned to teams that are producing outcomes. And I will challenge anybody to find those as the same thing. So off my soapbox for a second, and the reason why I'm doing this is the COVID impact has been massive. The teams are not clearly defined. The teams are not collaborating as well because of the reasons I just mentioned. The individuals, therefore, are less productive. That means they're at risk. When they're at risk from the company perspective, they're at risk individually with their own ability to produce, their anxiety, and even their mental health and brain health. So these are real times and these are real issues. I am seeing some capability excellence where new products are being launched and new investments are happening in the functional view. That's great, but your customers that you're selling to don't care how your company's organized on an org chart. They want those outcomes, which means you've got to work cross-functionally together to achieve those. So these are being impacted. According to KPMG, 80% of revenue growth is hinging on digital offerings, and those digital offerings require multiple functional departments to work together, and you've got to get out of your silos. Also, there's a lot of research going on with these pandemic frontline workers and knowledge workers. There's millions of people working around the clock right now. The top causes of this are going to lead to burnout, but basically their workload has gone up. They're trying to juggle their personal and professional life. For example, I've got 2 children that are trying to learn remotely right now, and you're seeing it probably in your schooling systems, if you have kids, what a functional view does in a time like this. They're not very outcome driven, and that puts a lot of burden on you. The same type of thing is going to happen to your customers that you're selling to, your company's selling to. Also, a lack of communication and increased time pressures. These are ingredients of burnout. So everything is, if everything's important and you haven't shifted how you work and you've added more to your people as a leader, you've got to take a step back because we've reached the limits of human endurance. We're at the 2-month mark in many cases in the United States. We have reached the limit of how people can perform right now. And so you've got to make some decisions. And also from an individual worker perspective, you've got to be really clear on this is not management's fault. I'd like to see that language be purged as well. The management's not the reason that this is happening. It is just what it is. And I can explain the historical view on what's going on here. But this is natural in the state of things, and it's a creative time, not a time to point fingers. So let's move forward in that vein. Let's talk about how we can move together forward as employees and leaders. I view it as equally important. I've worked with executives, I've worked in transformations, and I believe in the importance of companies, and I believe in the importance of value creation and value communication, and I believe that organizations exist to help investors get a return on their investment. I also believe that they're here to help economies grow and help people grow, and a lot of good can happen from business. If you don't believe that businesses are good, you're automatically going to be biased. There's bad apples in every business, but you got to think about right now at a time like this, what's the value of the business you're working for? And if it's just a job to you, then what are you doing there anyway? Because if you're in just a job mode right now, that's not the time we're in. So let's talk about leaders and teams. equally important, equally playing an equal role. There's a company on the right and there's team on the left. Now, this is important to think about. I've talked about the organizational view of silos. That's aligned a lot to the right side. I want to talk about the team. What's a team that you're on? And again, don't think about marketing. Don't think about where you align on an org chart. What teams are you on? And ask yourself that. Write it down. If you don't know right now, this is your first conversation you need to be having with your peers and your leadership. You need to define the teams that you're on because those teams add value to the company. So let me give you an example. Let's talk about a marketing team or even a learning and development type of team. You might say I'm in marketing. You might say I'm in L&D. But what do those departments do? Marketing might be doing demand generation campaigns, and they're on the demand generation team that brings new products to market or explains capabilities to customers. Those are the outcomes that you drive on the team. Now, you also need to talk about and think about, are those capabilities and skills required to bring new products to market? Are those only in your silo, your department? Typically not. So how integrated, if you go back to the 2x2 grid, how integrated are you? Also, from an L&D perspective, you might be in that training team, but yes, what are you providing to the company? It might be you bring on new hires, and you bring on new hires in a way that they're more productive. That outcome of new hire productivity, that also is not, it should not happen in a silo. That's got management involved, it's got HR involved, etc. So when you plot these out, you have different roles of people. There's might be writers involved, designers involved, project managers involved, technologists involved, and obviously leaders involved. You also have internal support teams and other departments involved that might exist in the company view. So what we're going to talk about to move forward together is these teams and these individuals have existing muscle memory and the way that they've always done things that might need to be looked at. Can we agree that in a time like this, it might be good to take stock of what we need to do differently as individual workers? Do we agree that it might be good to think about the work that we do and how routine that work was and whether or not our company's in a transformational time? If we were in routine work where we were just passing information around, do we recognize that perhaps our company's in a transformational state? Does that mean we need to work differently, think differently, and behave differently? Do we believe that we might not have the skills that we need, right? Can we just be transparent about that? Can we just say that? Yes, we can, especially in a time like this. Let's be clear. When you look back at the time we're in, this time will be in textbooks. It's going to be in the history books. It's okay to admit that we don't have all the answers. We've got to break down our muscle memory. Muscle memory, what is it? Much like a golf swing, if you play golf. Much like bowling, if you bowled. Much like driving a car. The way in which you go about it, the way in which you integrate with the golf club, with the car, with the bowling ball, and how you do it, the more you practice it, the more it gets ingrained between your brain and your muscles. That becomes muscle memory. The greatest example of this would be Tiger Woods. Over time, as a golfer, became the greatest golfer in the world with a golf swing. Then he hurt his back. He spent years relearning how to do golf. He had to basically overcome all that muscle memory of what made him successful. So we've got to think about what might be getting in the way from a muscle memory perspective. On the right side, we need to think about the organizational drag that exists. The organizational drag also has a legacy view of what happened before versus what we need to moving forward. You can hear terms such as simplicity, keeping things simple, this is too hard, I don't know who to go to, this is too many meetings, I'm overworked, right? There's organizational drag. That has to do with what I would consider and call strategic inertia, where the company was on a trajectory beforehand and now it needs to change. The way to visualize organizational drag is a cruise ship. Think about the world's largest cruise ship. It sets sail. It goes fast through the ocean. To make a change in direction, it could take kilometers and miles to change its direction. To slow down in port, it starts slowing down kilometers ahead of time because the inertia of the cruise ship will keep it going in a straight line. And that's what's happening here. In 30 days, customers expected you to pivot. In 30 to 60 days, because of COVID, finance teams were under attack from customers. So a 30 to 60 day view, when the organizational drag may, in many cases I've seen, and I'd say 80% of the time, it takes 18 months to make some of these strategic changes. So can we all agree that the strategic changes in the way the business needed to work has to change? And can we all agree that 30 to 60 days is really time compressed compared to what we're used to? There are companies that have busted down organizational drag. There are top performers in each of these. But for most of the companies that are out there, they've got to do a better job at recognizing that a lot of their organizational systems and processes are going to need to change. Can we just agree with that? Can we just say that's probably what we're talking about needing to do? And then admit that these things might not be set up to be the most optimal, and what can we do to simplify? So that's what we're going to talk about here, because this friction that happens between these two areas, we've got to be able to overcome it. So why do I talk about muscle memory? Well, muscle memory has to do with behaviors of people. What's the behavior? To the HR crowd, they'll say skills and competencies and abilities. To leaders and teams, it's like the stuff that people do. It's important stuff. I determine, and I call a behavior, it's a visible action that produces a result. That visible action that produces is often misunderstood because it's not tied to results, and those results are not tied to the mission and outcome of the company. So behaviors need to align to the strategies and objectives of the company. So let me give you some examples. I know it's a busy chart, and you can print this out, but basically what we've got here is the actions that we take, such as following an approach, produces what, like a meeting or a conversation, and then why. In the sales world, it could be quota. In the service world, it could be on-time delivery. Here's some examples. I've interacted with my computer. I've typed on my computer. I created some meeting objectives for everybody so that we can have a successful meeting. You take this away, that production capability, you don't produce a meeting objective, how successful is that meeting going to be? Simple, right? This is, on my team, I don't go to a meeting unless there's a meeting agenda and the subject line is clear. Why? Is it because I'm a jerk? No, because I don't understand what my expectation is and what my role is. Here's another one, interacting with my manager to prepare for a meeting with executives. Why? The why here is important to uncover potential customer problems. So if I don't prepare, how well am I going to do that? This is important to map out. As a knowledge worker, you should take stock of the behaviors that you're asked to do, what actions create what results, and what are you doing in the middle. This is binary. As a leader, if you're only expecting results and you're not walking through the actions and the production that people are doing to contribute to the company and to the team, this is hidden and you don't understand reality. So this is why muscle memory is important. You got to break it down. You got to do that work. This is a good time to do that. Why do I talk about organizational drag? This has to do with organizations, obviously, but why? Well, we're moving from a siloed effort in many organizations to cross-functional endeavor. These are journeys. These are missions. These are outcomes that we drive together. It cuts across silos. It's the new normal. It's how work needs to get done. I flat out said, if you're not aligned to a team working this way, it's going to really be hard to understand your value as a leader. If you're in a leader role and you're leading only a department view, you're not easily mapped to the corporate strategy. This type of work is how you do that. So let's talk about what that looks like. I've already outlined that individuals and teams can produce. I separate the team from a department and a function. I am not talking about functions and departments. I'm talking about the cross-functional team that adds value to a customer or provides that service to others. So that team, what is it, and how does it work to produce results? Well, individuals have teamwork skills. They make a contribution. Sounds pretty simple. So I could ask you, what contribution are you making? That as a worker, as a knowledge worker, that should not offend you. You should be able to explain that. If you can't explain the contribution you're making to the company on a daily basis, then you're not integrated into the team as much as you think you are. So skills of teamwork are important, teamwork skills. So what's the team's view? Well, teams do the team's work. In other words, they do the work of teams. That work of teams is cross-functional. They produce outcomes and results through collaboration. So individuals contribute, teams collaborate. Individuals provide skills and knowledge and ideas and a point of view. Teams work together to produce results, drive adoption, make improvements, and create intellectual property. Teamwork is a skill. It's a contribution. It's a skill at the individual level. Collaboration is a process. If you don't have a documented collaboration process and you haven't defined how your work needs to happen, you should do that. That's easier said than done. Most of the times when I talk to and work with companies, especially high-performing sales teams and marketing teams, there is no collaborative process defined. It's basically everybody for themselves. So those teams don't work, basically, and it defaults back to individual siloed efforts. So teams need to work. There needs to be a collaborative process to drive results. That's something you can work on. Why is that? Why do teams need to work? Well, they blend both the organizational and individuals. Teams that are effectively set up, they bring together the what, the who, and the where from the organization. Know what to do, know who to talk to, and know where to get it. Those are organizational components that leaders need to provide. Individuals have know-how. They know when and they know why they're doing it. So let's talk about how this looks and how this works to bring employees and leaders together. So right now, pop quiz, where is prioritization happening in your company? I just talked about production. I just talked about teams work versus teamwork. I just talked about the importance of having a collaborative process and doing the work, and I just explained where work comes from. Who's setting priorities in your company? Who's doing that? Where does prioritization come from? Well, in many cases, leaders believe that they're prioritizing. However, what happens is that prioritization right now really is you've got to do everything we ask. And what's happening is that prioritization is happening at the knowledge worker level at the desktop. If individuals feel conflicted and they are not sure of the priorities of the company, and they're not sure of how to rationalize the team's priorities versus the department they work for, they will have to choose how to use their time at the desktop. And this is why you're seeing so many people having to work 12 to 14 hours in a remote setting right now. Additionally, there's a conflict because the team work of working in a department versus the teams working horizontally. When you are assigned to a department leader in marketing or finance or HR or sales, that has to be your default because you report into them. And so those department managers are conflicted based on allocating resources. And there's not a lot of visibility in allocating resources against cross-functional teaming. Here's an example of that briefly. I did a work in a company. There were 256 individual actions to onboard somebody. And this onboarding somebody, when I say that, it includes the HR, talent acquisition, business planning, first line, second line manager sign-offs, obviously the hiring manager's approval, and the work of the L&D team. When you look at those 5 or 6 departments and you ask why do those people need to work together, there's not a cohesive answer. This is the power of teams. When we created a cross-functional team and said, look, all you representatives from your departments, you're on this recruiting team, we're all working together. And let's drop the idea that the recruiting team, because we use the word recruiting, that's automatically owned by HR. Let's think about it from the candidate experience. Now it's built a cross-functional team. Those 256 actions went down to about 10 or 11, and the time to bring somebody on was dropped by over 200%. So without prioritization happening at a team level or a leader level, it really got complex at the worker level. So Peter Drucker said the most valuable assets of a 20th century company were its production equipment. Industrial Revolution, it was the production equipment. Now it's the most valuable asset of a 21st century institution. Even if it doesn't matter what industry, but it's its knowledge, its workers, and their productivity. And that's why I've been talking about that. Do not let your productivity be under attack by this crisis. Figure out how to work through it, and I'm going to give you ways to do that now. So here's how you need to think about making this work. All employees want to come to work and do a good job. If they're working for the company, you have to assume positive intent and that their contribution is expected to be valuable, or else you would not have hired them in the first place. So in a time of stress like this, in a time of change like this, if you're in a leadership role, you hired folks. And if you're an employee, you joined the company. So let's just talk about what this meant back then. Well, it meant that you would do good work. You would do good work to produce an impact if you're an individual. And from a management perspective, you hired people to do that good work and provide that impact. Now, what is good? Well, good is what's valuable to the company. The company's paying the paycheck. The company's paying insurance. The company's paying for the employee. If the employee determines what good is only, that's not going to work. It just doesn't. There's an economic impact to that. Obviously, I'm not saying that employees don't matter. However, employees have a value to the company, and that value needs to be understood. So what is work? Well, work is a contribution. Companies pay people to make a valuable contribution. So what's your valuable contribution as a knowledge worker? How has that changed post-COVID? As a leader, how do you help your teams contribute, your team members contribute? Well, that's a bit of a mystery, so let's dive into that a little bit. Most teams are built to drive some sort of outcome aligned to the mission and strategy of the company. Obviously, in most companies, that's changed in the last 20 to 30, 60, 90 days. So it's helpful to re-clarify that and make sure that's communicated to everybody. It's also helpful to understand from a teaming perspective what outcomes need to be driving right now. So, well, let's talk about that. Once you define the outcomes, what is work? Well, work has two components. Work happens when somebody converts and creates. Both of these are required, a conversion and a creation. If somebody says, write me an email, well, you've got to convert that blank sheet into something, and then you have to create something. The conversion of the blank into filled up email is important, and the quality of what's created is important. If you're just creating all the time and you're not converting something into something else, you're not going to make the contribution. If you sit around and just convert all the time, you're overthinking everything and you're not creating. And I can spend more time on this, but in the essence of time here, I want to keep going because you guys most likely need to talk about what's your priority as an individual contributor and what do you need to achieve in your role. The prioritization and achievements in a role need to be tied to outcomes. These are important discussions to be having one-on-one with team leaders and employees because this is where productivity comes from. So let's continue through this. How would this work? How would we bring all these things together? Well, first of all, at a time like this, let's examine what's going on. By examining, I mean determining the desired outcomes that people need to be achieving in their role and on the teams that they're on. Then let's enable that. What do I mean by enable? I mean implementing to achieve the desired outcomes. And then let's elevate. Instead of thinking about all the tasks that need to be happening, let's think about the outcomes and what feedback we need to drive those outcomes. To do that successfully, let's start talking about and having conversations together as leaders and employees on how we can simplify to overcome organizational drag and how we can shift our muscle memory. and let's use the language. Let's, again, why I was so strong about we've got to be able to have these conversations. If you examine and you need to enable something different and you need to elevate to a different spot, you've got to think about the organizational drag and muscle memory, and you need to have conversations about that. And I hope this presentation helps and this workshop helps. So examine, what is it? Well, determine the desired outcome to achieve new and emerging definition of success. Let's shift from I'm in HR to we need to upskill our employees right now to be able to have virtual sales conversations with their customers. That is a shift, and it's going to create friction. Why is it going to create friction? Because you're going to have new muscle, you're going to have to overcome existing muscle memory as an individual contributor, and also you're going to have organizational drag in the way. So what policies and procedures are going to get in your way there? This is important to think about. So how would you shift the muscle memory here? Well, re-energize and refocus and re-clarify. Re-energize might mean, you know what, you've gone through 2 months of just trying to keep up. You need a couple days off. That's okay. I mean, I've talked to people that don't even know what day it is. That's okay. Talk to your manager, get some time off, re-energize. From a refocus perspective, you need to think about, and I'm going to give you a tool at the end of this, what's your purpose and what's your value add and what's your strengths. I'm going to give you something you can print out to think about that, but you need to fill that out and recenter yourself. From a clarification perspective, you need to understand what the critical relationships are inside your company. And if people have left the company, once you're over the interpersonal piece of that, ask yourself what contribution they made that you found valuable, and go ask for help on finding somebody who's making that contribution. And if you need to understand what the contribution is, you can go back and review this video. And think about the give and take that you have inside the company. There's a give and take that you have to make, but there's also a give and get. If you are being asked to produce something and you're asked to do the work, again, that means converting and creating. If you're being asked to convert something and create something together, that's going to be called good work. You need to be able to understand what the next person's doing with that so you can add the right kind of value. From an organizational drag perspective, when it comes to examining, do you understand the vision of the company and how the company's pivoted? Do you have clarity on that? So as a leader, what you can do to simplify organizational drag, that's the leader side. The leader can make sure that they're using what I call radical empathy, truly understanding what's happening with customers, with first line employees to customers, and what's happening on your department or function and functional work force, as well as the teams that people are working on. And I would prioritize in that order the team that they're working on and the outcome that they're making, less around the departmental view. Also clarifying expectations. Back on the previous slide, there's a difference between being results driven and outcome driven. Results driven oftentimes means you got it done. Being results driven means you're contributing to the outcome. These are concepts that are not easily understood. As a leader, are you helping people understand that? Also, the difference between being able to tackle these things often comes down to the culture that you as a leader are creating. Do you create a culture where it's okay to fail? Do you create a culture where it's okay to admit that people don't know what they don't know, or that they need to rest, or that they need to refocus, or that they need reclarification? You have to create a culture where that's acceptable. On the flip side, as an employee, don't take advantage of that. Ask for that type of help and be empathetic to your leader that this is a new time for everybody. And remember, we're in this together and we need to figure it out together. And equal roles are required: leaders and team members. So let's talk about enable. So the second part of this. This is determining the new outcome that needs to be achieved. Understanding the strategy and the company. And if the company is in survival mode, what does that mean to workers? This is important to understand. Also, if the company wants to double down on growth and capture market share right now and innovate, what does that mean? If it means protecting existing customer relationships, what does that mean, and how does that translate to individuals? So from a muscle memory perspective, check yourself. What I mean by that is, why are you at the company? Why are you there? What's going on? When you go in the mall and you go into when you used to go to the mall and you walked into the mall and there was that mall map and it had a red dot and it said, you are here. You need to take stock of where you're at, because you're going to have to unlearn and relearn some things. And if that's not okay right now, then you're not in the right spot. Because a lot of companies are having to transform right now. If you're looking for the comfortable job that makes the money right now, you're not fully embracing the time that we're in as an employee. So figure out how you get there, and figure out how you can, add the right value and be transparent. Also realize that you're not the only one working. Also realize that you're not the only one who thinks you know everything. That you're not the only one who thinks you have the answer. And if people would just, ... Everybody else is thinking that way too. So, tell your boss, sometimes you just need to vent, right? Also, realize that unlearning something old and learning something new is going to be uncomfortable, but you should clarify what the new comfort zone is and what that means. What's the new golf swing, especially, and figure out how you practice it. And that's a great conversation to have with managers. On the management side, to simplify organizational drag, you've got to create some white space. I know that's a fuzzy word right now, but I'm not talking about leaving employees alone. I'm talking about the difference between meetings to get stuff done and get stuff done and get stuff done and go, activity, reporting, inspect, more. That's what it feels like to employees. Instead of having that get stuff done meeting, call a figure stuff out meeting. Take this deck and figure out what you need to do. Create white space around that with very little agenda. And you don't have to get it done at the end of the meeting, and talk it through. There's not enough creativity in a time like this, and that's where true innovation comes from. So create the space. That means you need to have empathy, and that might mean you need to have a conversation with folks. And remember that people that are in a fight or flight response, they're in a crisis mode as individual workers. It's incredibly difficult to be creative and innovative, which is probably what your company needs right now. But if your employees are in a fight or flight and you're adding to that and adding to the stress of that, instead of being in the trenches with them, they're not going to be creative. Also, from a workflow perspective, does that work really need to happen that way? I'm not talking about process. I'm talking about the work required to achieve outcomes. Processes are not oftentimes not fully understood or defined or documented. If you're in a company that has those documentations, it's a good time to relook at that. But you've got to be able to keep the work going. We saw this in the U.S. government response by cutting through the red tape and signing the executive orders to dodge a lot of red tape and free it up because it was getting gummed up. And that you might need to do internally. If you have not, as a leadership team, created the governance team around this and the decision-making body, that is highly recommended to create the team that has decision-making authority on a lot of this stuff. Can we waive this? Can we waive that? Can we give this pricing? Can we make some concessions, and doing that in a way that lets people bubble it up from the bottom up. That's important. And then finally, you got to design out some complexity. That you may not be able to do that right now, but you got to find a way to design out the complexity. A lot of the challenges that are existing today and why companies cannot make the changes required is their companies are too complex. That happened because you made it too complex. And oftentimes leaders made it too complex in the name of trying to help. In today's world, simplification requires design. Simplification is hard. That is not easy. Everybody wants simple and agrees with what that is. But when they start getting less, they don't like it. But that's what simple is giving people less. So how do you do that? And having those conversations. All right. Just real quick on this, an example of this is sales conversations. So simplifying sales conversations sounds like an easy thing to do, but when you look at everything laying around from marketing, product, sales, training, etc., there's a lot of stuff. So how do you streamline it? Okay, so elevating. This is from a muscle memory perspective. How do you elevate? By thinking about the customers that are impacted, understanding the relationships with customers, also the services that are being provided internally, and the business model. How is the business model changing? Um, these are important conversations to have with leaders. It's important to ask these questions because you're part of an ecosystem. The work that you provide, it needs to be valuable work. You need to be able to contribute the right kind of value, and that means you need to understand how your business works. You need to have business acumen. You need to understand what's happening from a financial perspective, because if you were surprised by what was happening with the actions that people were taking inside your company, that means you're not elevated enough to understand how businesses work. Well, on the right-hand side, simplifying the organizational drag. When you elevate here, is move from results-driven to mission-driven as a leader. Make sure people understand the outcomes that teams need to achieve, not departments, but teams. Have a list of the teams that are sanctioned by the business, and make sure you put the right people on those teams. And call them the critical response teams. You can learn a lot from crisis response plans, and you can learn a lot from how governments respond to natural disasters, how the Red Cross in the United States responds. You can model a lot of your leadership and management principles with the same types of language, and as well as the same types of structures. And I think that's a healthy discussion to have as a leader, because if people are feeling stuck on your team and or your department, then they're not going to feel like they're adding the right kind of value. When I talk about teaming, it's very specific to me. Teaming is the use of diverse thought and diverse activity and action to bring in multiple perspectives and people working together so that those synergies happen and results and outcomes are achieved. Somebody that doesn't participate on a team should be removed from a team. Somebody that's really a participating player on a team, if they're suddenly not there, the team should be aware and feel it because of their contributions missed. So teaming has to do with contributions to me. Teaming to me is the production unit in the digital economy. Teams produce the most value inside of an organization. Individuals can really create a lot of impact when they're on a team. That means they need to collaborate. I define collaboration as a process. That process is critical in order to convert an idea into an impact. And that collaboration process is oftentimes non-existent inside of companies. And all people are doing is throwing technology at it. For example, get on Slack, get on Teams, get on all these productivity softwares. Just because they use phrases like collaboration, communication, and teaming doesn't mean that they're actually equipping organizations to produce the right kind of value. So this is a management and leadership challenge to me, and that's the elevation discussion there. So the leadership there really requires authentic transparency and understanding of that. So this is what I've been talking about this whole time. The value today of you, and the value of you as a leader, and the value of you as a knowledge worker is your brain. This is the brain. And look at all those neurons firing. Most of businesses today rely on individuals and groups of people to team. And if you think about the brain, things like communication, attention, concentration, focus, emotions, problem solving, planning, judgment, all of it happens in the brain, and it's the control panel of the work. And because humans need to make the contribution, and because teams are the production unit inside of an organization, everybody has a role to play in keeping their head in the game and making sure they understand their contribution. The game has changed, and production is required. That production and your impact and contribution to production needs to align to the market and to the customers. And most companies don't understand their customers well enough to be on top of this change. So it's going to be reactive. The good thing is in all of this, what I've shared on this whole entire presentation, and I'm going to give you some tools here to go use here in a second. But the good thing about all this is businesses compete based on the decisions that people make. The rules of business are very simple and very few. There are some legal things you've got to deal with and make sure legally that your company is compliant. But after that, its rest of this is based on human decisions. And management and individual contributors make decisions all the time. And the complexity that you have in your company was human made. It was made by your company. It was made by people just like you. Not blaming them. I'm saying you can change it. You can change what's happening. You can do it. Just like other people that came before you created the complexity, you can come and create simplification and overcome muscle memory, and you can do it. In fact, you have to. It's not a choice. It's not a choice. So embrace the fact that you can do that. So I'm going to give you two pieces here. One is a document you can use to overcome organizational drag, and the next one is a document you can use to overcome muscle memory. The first one is, we call it the 5C framework, the execution framework. Clarity. Why are we doing what we're doing? Leaders and managers on this call, it should be okay for your employees to ask, why are we doing that? And you shouldn't not rip their head off. And you should not just say because. You should have answers. And I'm giving you some examples on the right. What's the process of collaboration? Just because they're working remotely and all of the blogs out there and all the articles say that people are more productive at home, what's your expectation on the process of collaboration? How's it supposed to work? And then who's setting priorities? Communication. What's your expectation there? Have a discussion with your department and your teams that are working, that your people are on, around what the communication needs are. Day and night is blurring. Days of the week are blurring. I'm actually, I'm recording this on a Saturday. I just started thinking about it just now, and I'm like, I forgot today was Saturday. It's just the time we're in, right? So what's your expectation on communication? Cadence, being purposeful on a cadence. This is a tough one because a lot of the cadence before was go, 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 go. But when you switch the cadence to what progress are we making on an outcome cadence, what progress are we making on our mission and our objectives cadence, that feels weird. It's a different muscle memory. And then command. How do we make sure that these things are happening? How do we do the right things and do those right things well? And again, how do we do the right things and do those right things well? And that's command. So find your 3 critical initiatives, your 3 critical projects that need to be worked on with a team, and fill this out. If the team is a cross-functional team, work on this with the other leaders as well, so that the people on the team understand what the charter is of the team. From a muscle memory perspective, I'm giving you the personal alignment template. The reason why I'm starting with this is I believe there's a lot of soul searching happening. I'm not trying to get into a touchy-feely spot here, and I don't like to over-rotate to individual emotions. My point on this is I use this and I give it to my clients to make sure that they're clear on why they're here. If they're getting a paycheck from the company and they are engaged in work, it's a fair ask to make sure their head's in the game. It's also a fair ask to understand what their contribution is. So why are you here? That should be a fair question that management asks. What's your definition of success in this company? What are your core values? What's your vision for your role? What assumptions do you make? What's your contribution? What's your learning plan? What key relationships? What resources do you need? What's your personal brand? Most people are not paying enough attention internally to their personal brand. A lot of people are getting let go right now because people don't like them. They're the ones that go ballistic in meetings, and nobody wants that right now. So what's your personal brand? How do you know what progress looks like? And then how do you overcome barriers? So print these out, take the time, fill it out, and have a discussion with your leadership team. So based on that and those two things, as an employee, watch this video, take notes, fill out the personal alignment template. What questions do you have? What do you want to see simplified? Make sure you have the alignment template with your manager, and you talk about what muscle memory needs to be shifted, and have a conversation about the work you need to be doing from slide 14. Have that conversation. As a leader and a manager, show this to your team. Ensure you've set priorities. Discuss the 5 E's from the organizational drag checklist. Talk about shifting and simplifying with other leaders, and then also have a candid conversation about work. You may have to watch this a couple times. I understand that this was moving fast. I also spent a lot of time on the why and the what, I gave you the how at the end. That was by design. Again, if you remember from the beginning, I did not want to launch you on a bunch of random activities. I really think the value of you in your role as a leader and a manager and employee is between your ears. It's your brain. Remember that. That's what makes you valuable. Your contribution as an employee will help your company innovate. That innovation in a time like this is critical, and a lot of companies are going to have rapid innovation explosion. Those that do figure out how to get through this are going to come out stronger. Those that are the victims, those that are blaming, those that are blaming management or blaming employees, they're one step closer to insolvency. So create the right environment, embrace the fact that we're all in this together. We're all on the same team inside your company. You're all on the same team, and figure out how to have these authentic conversations. Remember, the second wave is going to hit. There will be more layoffs. There will be more decisions that need to be made. Time is of the essence. I hope you found this conversation valuable. Please drop me a comment in the comment box. And I look forward to hearing your examples. I look forward to learning from you. How was this received? What did you do? Did you do this? Did it work? Please give me feedback on this, and anything I can do to help, let me know. Thank you so much for your time today. Go be productive.